They thought I'd stay silent forever, but a cheap scarf can unravel an entire family. And this year, at the Thanksgiving table, I realized that sometimes the sharpest weapon isn't a scream. It's the signed papers waiting in my drawer. They smiled over their $20,000 vacation plans while I held my $15 clearance scarf. They didn't know I owned the ground beneath their perfect life. They didn't know that silence, when wielded correctly, cuts deeper than any words ever could. My name is Helen Whitford, and I've spent 72 years learning that love doesn't always look like love. Sometimes it wears a designer suit and speaks in honeyed tones while sliding a knife between your ribs. I learned this lesson completely on the Thanksgiving that changed everything. The turkey sat golden on my son's dining table, surrounded by Caroline's perfect place settings, the ones with the gold-rimmed edges she'd registered for at their wedding. I'd given them cash instead. $500 I'd saved by skipping lunches at Stanton Food Processing, where I'd worked the line for 38 years. My fingers, still bearing the scars from decades of handling frozen poultry, trembled slightly as I reached for my water glass. "Mom, we have something special for you," Daniel announced, his voice carrying that false brightness I'd grown to recognize, the same tone he'd used when telling me they couldn't make it to my birthday dinner because Caroline's parents were in town. I watched as he produced 2 wrapped packages, one large and elegant with a silver bow, the other small and wrapped in discount store paper. My heart, foolish thing that it was, still hoped. "For the Hartmans," he said, handing the large package to Caroline's parents. Richard Hartman, retired bank executive, accepted it with the casual grace of someone accustomed to receiving tributes. "A little thank you for all your support this year." The room erupted in delighted gasps as they unveiled the contents, a luxury cruise package to the Mediterranean. $20,000. I knew the price because Caroline made sure to mention it 3 times, her voice lilting with pride. $20,000! Margaret Hartman pressed her manicured hand to her chest. "Oh, Daniel, Caroline, you shouldn't have." But they had, and everyone knew they should have. Then Daniel turned to me, that small package in his hand looking even smaller now. "And for you, Mom." The room fell silent as I unwrapped it. Not the respectful silence of anticipation, but the awkward quiet of people preparing to pretend. Inside was a scarf. Polyester. The clearance tag still attached. $14.99. Marked down from $29.99. "It's lovely." I managed, my throat tight. I ran my fingers over the cheap fabric, noting how it caught on my work-roughened hands. "We thought it would keep you warm at the bus stop," Caroline added helpfully, as if I needed the reminder that I still took public transportation while her parents drove a Mercedes. Richard Hartman cleared his throat and redirected the conversation to their cruise itinerary. The table came alive again with chatter about ports of call and shore excursions. No one looked at me. I sat there, invisible, the polyester scarf in my lap like a flag of surrender. I counted the wine stains on the tablecloth near my place setting, 3 small spots Caroline would bleach out later. I memorized the pattern of the wallpaper behind Daniel's head, roses climbing an invisible trellis, reaching for something they'd never grasp. I listened to my son laugh at Richard's investment stories, watched him refill Margaret's wine glass before it ever emptied, noticed how he unconsciously mirrored Richard's gestures. When had I become the ghost at my own son's table? When had my sacrifice, every double shift, every Christmas working overtime, every night I'd fallen asleep over his homework at the kitchen table, become worth less than a clearance rack scarf? The answer sat across from me in designer clothing, discussing vacation homes and stock portfolios. The answer had my son's last name and my grandchildren's faces, but had never once asked about the arthritis in my hands or remembered that I was allergic to shellfish, evident by the shrimp appetizers she'd served. As Caroline stood to clear the plates, making sure everyone noticed her new tennis bracelet catching the light, I held the scarf in my lap and made a decision. They thought I would disappear gracefully, fade into the background like the wallpaper roses. They thought I would be grateful for any crumb of acknowledgement, any discounted gesture of obligation. They thought wrong. The systematic erasure of Helen Whitford began long before that Thanksgiving dinner. I should have seen it coming, but mothers are experts at explaining away their children's cruelties. Each slight was a paper cut, small, sharp, and easily dismissed until you realized you were bleeding out. It started with the birthday parties. My granddaughter Emma's 7th birthday fell on a Saturday. I'd taken the bus to Walmart at 6:30 a.m. to buy her the American Girl doll she'd whispered about during our last phone call, the calls that had grown shorter and less frequent. When I arrived at the venue, Caroline's smile froze. "Oh, Helen, we weren't expecting you this early. The family celebration is tonight. This is just for Emma's school friends." The family celebration never happened. I found out through Facebook. Caroline's mother posting photos of Emma blowing out candles, surrounded by the Hartmans and their country club circle. My doll was returned 2 weeks later, still in its box. "Emma already has 3, Caroline explained. Then came the holiday shuffle. Christmas Eve, traditionally at my house since Daniel was born, suddenly became complicated. Caroline's parents had traditions too, she explained. Important ones. Mine could be adjusted. So I was allocated Christmas morning, 8 to 10 a.m. before they left for the Hartmans' elaborate brunch. I spent the rest of Christmas Day alone, eating leftover turkey soup and watching other families' celebrations through my apartment window. The exclusions multiplied like cancer cells. Daniel's promotion dinner. I learned about it from a neighbor who'd seen the announcement in the paper. Emma's school play. No one thought to mention it. Tyler's football games. You wouldn't enjoy sitting on those hard bleachers. Mom, not with your back. But Caroline was building something bigger than just a family that didn't include me. She was constructing an image, a brand. The Whitford Hartman success story, featured in the local society pages, her therapy practice, housed in a beautiful historic building, became the backdrop for charity galas and networking events. Her Instagram feed showcased a curated life, designer outfits, European vacations, children in private school uniforms. In every photo, the Hartmans featured prominently. Margaret's pearl necklaces and Richard's golf club memberships were woven into the narrative. They were presented as the foundation of this success. The wise mentors who'd guided their accomplished daughter and son-in-law. I appeared in none of these images. The woman who'd raised Daniel alone after his father's death, who'd worked double shifts to pay for his college, who'd typed his papers when he was too exhausted from football practice. I didn't fit the aesthetic. Your mother seems tired. I overheard Caroline tell Daniel once, maybe we shouldn't burden her with so many events. The burden, apparently, was my presence. My polyester blouses from JCPenney clashed with her silk cocktail dresses. My stories about the processing plant didn't pair well with discussions of mindfulness retreats. My apartment address, zip code 17061, wasn't the right numbers for their narrative. I became the obligatory phone call on Sunday evenings, the duty visit on Mother's Day, the December birthday card with a generic message. Caroline managed these interactions like a skilled conductor, ensuring they were brief, controlled, documented for propriety but never allowed to disrupt the real life she was orchestrating. The cruelest part was watching Daniel disappear into this manufactured life. My son, who once brought me dandelions in his chubby fists, who cried on my shoulder after his first heartbreak, who promised he'd buy me a house when he made it big, became a stranger in an expensive suit. He adopted Richard's way of checking his watch during our conversations. Margaret's habit of discussing people in terms of their usefulness. That Thanksgiving scarf wasn't just a thoughtless gift, it was a declaration. While the Hartmans were worth a $20,000 cruise, I was worth whatever was left on the clearance rack. It was Caroline's final masterpiece, the moment she revealed exactly where I stood in their carefully constructed world. I folded the scarf carefully that night, placed it on my dresser where I could see it every morning, not as a reminder of my humiliation, but as evidence. Caroline thought she'd written me out of the story. What she didn't know was that I owned the paper it was printed on. The historic building at 247 Market Street stood like a crown jewel in Millersburg's modest downtown. 3 stories of red brick and original hardwood, with tall windows that caught the morning light and threw it back onto the street like scattered diamonds. Everyone who passed admired it. The restored Victorian details, the brass placard announcing Whitford Therapeutic Services, the carefully tended window boxes overflowing with seasonal flowers. What they didn't know was that the deed to this architectural treasure bore my name, Helen Marie Whitford. I'd bought it 40 years ago, back when downtown was dying and historic meant old and unwanted. The seller, desperate to unload it, accepted my offer of $18,000, every penny I'd saved plus a loan that took me 15 years to repay, while other single mothers were renting apartments. I was patching a leaking roof and replacing broken windows, convinced that owning something solid would give Daniel stability after his father's death for decades. I'd rented the spaces for next to nothing to a veteran starting a barber shop, a young woman opening a bakery, a retired teacher offering tutoring. The building became my quiet rebellion against a world that said factory workers like me shouldn't own property, even when developers offered 10 times what I'd paid. I held on. Then Daniel came to me 5 years ago, eyes bright with Caroline's ambition. Mom, Caroline found the perfect space for her practice, but the rent downtown is insane. $3,000 a month minimum. We'll never get ahead at that rate. He walked me through the building on Market Street, not knowing I'd already memorized every floorboard creak, every draft from the original windows. Caroline had done her research, praising the location, the foot traffic, the prestige of the address. Her vision was grand, a wellness center that would attract the country club set, complete with meditation rooms and organic tea service. If only we could find something affordable. Daniel sighed, running his hand along the banister I'd stripped and refinished myself one summer. I made my mistake then, in that moment of maternal weakness. You can use it, I said. No rent, just maintain it well. The joy in his eyes was worth any price. Or so I thought. No lease was drawn up. Family doesn't need paperwork, Daniel assured me. Caroline threw her arms around me, the first and last genuine embrace she'd ever given. They moved in within the month, transforming my functional spaces into something from a magazine spread. The transformation was remarkable. Caroline had exquisite taste funded by her parents' connections and Daniel's growing salary. Crystal chandeliers replaced my practical fixtures. The walls became gallery spaces for abstract art that cost more than my annual pension. The therapy rooms were furnished with pieces that whispered money in every carefully chosen detail. What I hadn't anticipated was how completely they would erase my connection to the building. The deed might say Helen Whitford, but every public trace of my ownership vanished. In interviews with the local paper, Caroline spoke of discovering this gem and having the vision to restore it. At Chamber of Commerce meetings, she accepted compliments on their beautiful building. The narrative was refined and repeated until even Daniel seemed to believe it. I visited once, early on, arriving at 2:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. The receptionist, young, polished, wearing the kind of dress I'd only seen in windows, looked at me with polite confusion. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitford doesn't have any openings today. Would you like to schedule a consultation? Our initial sessions are $200. She thought I was a patient, a charity case. Probably, given my worn coat and sensible shoes. When I explained I was Daniel's mother, her expression shifted to something worse than confusion. Pity mixed with second-hand embarrassment. Caroline appeared then, immaculate in cream-colored cashmere. "Helen, what a surprise. Daniel's in session, but I can give you a quick tour." The quick tour was designed to remind me I didn't belong. She whisked me past the waiting room where well-dressed women flipped through Architectural Digest, past the meditation space where someone was paying $150 an hour for guided breathing, past the conference room where she hosted her Women in Wellness leadership circles. "Isn't it wonderful what we've done with the space?" she asked, not waiting for an answer. as if my 40 years of mortgage payments, maintenance, and property taxes were just the prelude to her real story. That night, I went home and pulled out the metal box from under my bed. Inside, yellowed but legal, lay the deed, the tax records, every receipt for every repair. I ran my fingers over the raised seal on the deed, feeling the weight of what I'd allowed to happen. They thought I'd given them a building. What I'd actually given them was rope. The art of unsettling someone lies not in what you do, but in what you stop doing. After Thanksgiving, I became a master of calculated absence. Daniel's calls went unanswered. Not ignored, I let them ring through to voicemail. Listened to his messages growing increasingly confused, then concerned. "Mom, just checking in. Call me back." Then, "Mom, Caroline says you haven't responded to her text about Christmas plans." Finally, "Mom, are you okay? This isn't like you." Wasn't it? He'd know if he'd been paying attention these past 5 years. On a sleety Tuesday morning at 10:45 a.m., I appeared at the building on Market Street, not at the main entrance where the receptionist would announce me, but through the side door I still had keys, for keys they'd never thought to ask about. I climbed the back stairs, my footsteps echoing in the narrow stairwell that Caroline had deemed too unsightly to renovate. The second floor hummed with prosperity. Through the frosted glass doors, I could see shadows of clients in session, hear the muted tones of therapeutic conversation. $300 an hour. According to the website I'd studied, 4 clients a day, 5 days a week. The math was simple and staggering. I settled into an alcove near the conference room, pretending to study the abstract art on the walls. When clients emerged from their sessions, I smiled pleasantly, looking like someone's harmless grandmother waiting for an appointment, but I observed everything. The Hermes bags, the Tesla keys, the casual mentions of winter homes in Vail. Caroline found me there at 12:15 p.m., her composure cracking slightly at the edges. "Helen, what are you doing here?" "Admiring what you've done with my building," I said, emphasizing the possessive just enough to watch her flinch. Of course. Would you like to have lunch? We could go to that new bistro." "No need. I brought a sandwich." I pulled out the same brown bag I'd carried to the factory for 38 years. "I think I'll eat in the conference room. Such a lovely view of Market Street. The conference room is booked. At 12:30 p.m. on a Tuesday?" I walked past her, noting how her manicured nails dug into her palms. "Don't worry, dear. I'll be gone before your Women in Wellness meeting." I ate my peanut butter sandwich at the polished conference table, leaving a few crumbs on the surface she'd have to clean before her important guests arrived. Through the window, I watched the street I'd watched for 40 years, remembering when the bakery below was a pawn shop, when the boutique across the way was a hardware store where I'd bought my first set of tools. Caroline appeared in the doorway 3 times, each approach more agitated than the last. "Helen, I really need to prepare the room." "Of course." I gathered my things with deliberate slowness. "You know, I was thinking about that lovely cruise you gave the Hartmans. $20,000. That's about what I paid for this building in 1984. Her face went through several expressions: confusion, calculation, alarm. "Well, with inflation and property values," she began. "Oh, I know all about property values. Did you know Coldwell Banker approached me last month? They have a client very interested in this location, offered $1.2 million. I watched her process this information, saw the moment she realized the precariousness of their position. But family is family, isn't it? Even when they value you at $15. I left her standing there. Her usual poise shattered like the wine glass she'd dropped later that afternoon when I appeared, unannounced, at the rear entrance just as she was escorting a senator's wife to her car. The erosion continued for weeks. I developed a habit of walking past the building at unpredictable times, sometimes pausing to chat with longtime neighbors who remembered when I'd bought it. Helen's building, they still called it, much to the confusion of Caroline's high-end clientele. I attended the Downtown Business Association meeting where Caroline was presenting her annual charity gala plans. Sitting in the front row, saying nothing but making my presence felt with every glance at the building specs she was displaying. Daniel finally cornered me at the grocery store, by the frozen foods where the temperature matched our relationship. "Mom, what are you doing? Caroline's upset. You're making everyone uncomfortable." Uncomfortable? I selected a bag of peas, checking the price per pound out of habit. How terrible. I'd hate for anyone to feel undervalued or ignored. "Is this about the scarf?" "Mom, it was just, we were focused on the Hartmans because they've done so much for us this year." "Yes, that Mediterranean cruise must have required quite a sacrifice from you both." I moved toward the checkout, forcing him to follow. "Tell me, Daniel, what sacrifices have I made for you over the years? Or have you forgotten those too?" He had. I could see it in his eyes. My story had been edited out so thoroughly that he couldn't even remember the original version. But Caroline hadn't forgotten. Caroline knew exactly what power I held, and my random appearances, my pointed comments about property values, my pleasant chats with her wealthy clients about the building's history. All of it was slowly driving her toward the conclusion I intended. She broke first, as I knew she would. The invitation came on expensive stationery, afternoon tea at the club, just the two of us, to clear the air. I left it unopened on my dresser, next to the clearance scarf. The law office of Morrison and Associates occupied a narrow storefront between the dry cleaner and the hardware store, the kind of practice that handled wills for teachers and real estate closings for families buying their first homes, not the kind of place Caroline would ever notice, which made it perfect. At 9:15 a.m. on a Thursday morning, I sat across from James Morrison, who'd been handling my legal matters since I bought the building. He was grayer now, his hands marked with age spots that matched my own, but his eyes remained sharp as he reviewed the documents I'd brought. "You want to list the property," he said. Not a question, but a confirmation of what he could already see in my face. Fair market value, no special considerations. He leaned back, studying me over his reading glasses. "Helen, they've put roughly $300,000 into renovations, without a lease agreement. They're family," I said. "They didn't think we needed paperwork. I'm sure they'll understand that family relationships can evolve." By 2:30 p.m. that afternoon, the "For Sale" sign stood proudly on Market Street, its red and white commercial real estate placard impossible to miss. Morrison had suggested discretion, perhaps a pocket listing, but I wanted visibility. I wanted everyone who passed to see it, to ask questions, to wonder. Caroline's black Mercedes screeched to a halt 45 minutes later, through my apartment window 3 blocks away. I could see her standing on the sidewalk, cell phone pressed to her ear, gesticulating wildly at the sign as if her anger could make it disappear. My own phone buzzed incessantly, 12 calls from Daniel, 18 from Caroline, text messages in increasing levels of capitalization. I made chamomile tea and waited. They arrived at 6:20 p.m., Daniel still in his work suit, Caroline in what I recognized as her power outfit, the one she wore to important meetings. Their faces wore matching expressions of barely controlled panic dressed up as concern. "Mom," Daniel began before they were fully through my door, "there's been some kind of mistake." "No mistake." I gestured to the sofa, but they remained standing, too agitated to sit. "I've decided to sell the building, Mr. Morrison assured me we should have multiple offers within the week." "You can't," Caroline caught herself, modulated her tone to something she probably used with difficult clients. "Helen, let's discuss this rationally. We've built our entire practice there. Our clients, our reputation." "Yes, you've built quite a reputation." I sipped my tea, noting how her eye twitched at my calm. "I particularly enjoyed the article in the Society pages about your vision in restoring a neglected historic property. Such creative writing." Daniel stepped forward, using the voice he'd once used to ask for extending curfew. "Mom, please, let's talk about this. Whatever's bothering you, what's bothering me?" I set down my teacup with deliberate precision. "Let me think. Perhaps it's being erased from my own property, or watching you gift $20,000 to people who golf while I take the bus, or—" I reached for the scarf, still folded on the side table. Being valued at exactly $14.99, marked down from $29.99. It was just a gift, Daniel protested. It didn't mean... Everything means something. I stood, forcing them to step back. You taught me that. Caroline, every detail in your practice means something, doesn't it? The chandelier that costs more than I made in 6 months, the art that elevates the space, the carefully curated image of success. Well, this means something too. Caroline's mask finally slipped completely. You're destroying everything we've worked for out of spite? Over a scarf? No, dear. I'm selling my property, as is my right. You're welcome to make an offer, of course. Though at market value, it might cut into your cruise budget. I pulled out the folder Morrison had prepared, market analysis, comparable sales, the development potential that had builders circling like sharks. $1.2 million is the starting point, cash offers preferred, no special terms for current occupants without formal lease agreements. Daniel sank onto my sofa uninvited, his head in his hands. Mom, you know we can't. We don't have that kind of liquid capital. Everything is tied up in the practice. The house, the kids' education funds. Interesting how money works, isn't it? I observed. $20,000 can appear for a cruise, but not for 40 years of investment. Funny how value gets assigned. Caroline pulled out her phone, probably calculating their options. I watched her face change as she absorbed the reality. Without the building, their practice would hemorrhage money on rent. Moving would mean losing clients, starting over. Their carefully constructed image would crack and crumble. There has to be another way, she said finally. The words dragged from her like pulled teeth. What do you want? What did I want? For my son to remember who raised him. For recognition of sacrifices made in silence. For one genuine moment of appreciation that wasn't tinged with embarrassment at my existence. But it was too late for any of that. I want fair market value for my property, I said simply. The same thing any owner would want, though I suppose if the Hartmans are feeling generous after their cruise, they might help with the down payment. After all, family helps family, doesn't it? They left without another word, Caroline's heels clicking sharply on my worn linoleum, Daniel's shoulders bent like an old man's. Through the window, I watched them sit in the Mercedes for a long moment before driving away. The sign stayed up, its presence a daily reminder that ownership meant more than possession. By the next morning, 3 potential buyers had already called Morrison's office. I folded the scarf and placed it back on the table. Evidence of the moment. They revealed my worth to them, and I revealed theirs to the world. News travels fast in a small town, but scandal travels faster. By Monday morning, the for sale sign had become Millersburg's favorite conversation starter. At the post office, the bank, the diner where I'd eaten breakfast every Saturday for 20 years. Everyone had heard about the Whitford family drama playing out on Market Street. Is it true? Martha Phillips asked me at the grocery store, her eyes bright with the particular joy of someone who'd found Caroline condescending at last year's hospital fundraiser. They really never paid you rent. I selected tomatoes with careful attention. I prefer not to discuss family matters. But my silence only fueled the speculation. The story grew with each telling. The successful therapist who'd built her empire on her mother-in-law's charity. The ungrateful son who'd forgotten where he came from. Someone, I suspected Martha, mentioned the $20,000 cruise versus the clearance scarf, and that detail spread like wildfire through the country club set. Caroline's carefully constructed image began showing cracks by Tuesday. Her 10 a.m. client canceled, citing a scheduling conflict, then her 2 p.m. by Wednesday. The receptionist was fielding calls from clients requesting their records be transferred to other practices. I knew all this because Nancy Chen at the bakery below the building kept me informed. She'd been there 15 years, remembered when I'd reduced her rent after her husband's cancer diagnosis. That receptionist was crying in the bathroom. Nancy reported over coffee and fresh croissants. And doctor. Caroline had to cancel her Women in Wellness luncheon. Only 3 people RSVP'd. The Hartmans. Those pillars of society distanced themselves with surgical precision. Margaret was suddenly too busy to attend Caroline's charity committee meetings. Richard developed urgent business in Philadelphia whenever Daniel called. Their cruise plans remained intact, but their enthusiasm for their daughter and son-in-law cooled to match the December weather. Daniel appeared at my door on Thursday evening, looking haggard. No Caroline this time. She was too proud to beg twice. "Mom, please, the practice is hemorrhaging clients. We're getting calls from reporters asking about the building, about our family situation. Emma came home from school crying because someone said we were getting evicted." Evicted? I poured him coffee. I wasn't cruel enough to deny him that. No one's evicting you. The new owners might want to renegotiate terms, of course. "Market rate for that space is $3,500 a month, I believe." He flinched. "You know we can't afford that on top of a commercial mortgage. Then perhaps you should have thought about that before you decided I was worth less than a clearance scarf." It wasn't about the money. No. I pulled out my phone, showed him Caroline's Instagram post from Thanksgiving, the Hartman's cruise tickets displayed like a trophy, captioned, "So grateful for real family. Everything with your wife is about money. Daniel, the right zip code, the right car, the right image. Well, image is expensive, and maintaining it without my building, that's going to cost more than you bargained for." He stayed for an hour, cycling through denial, anger, bargaining. I'd raised a good negotiator, but I'd also raised him. I knew every tactic, every emotional appeal. When he finally left, defeated. I saw him sit in his car for 20 minutes before driving away. By Friday, the exodus was complete. Caroline's Friday afternoon Mindfulness for Success workshop, usually booked solid at $200 per person, had 0 registrations. The parking lot that typically held luxury vehicles sat empty, except for Caroline's Mercedes and the receptionist's Honda. I took my usual walk past the building at 3:15 p.m., noting the drawn blinds in the second-floor windows. Through the glass door, I could see the receptionist reading a magazine, no longer bothering to maintain the pretense of busy professionalism. At the hardware store, Tom Morrison, no relation to my lawyer, mentioned he'd heard from his cousin in real estate that 3 developers were already preparing bids. "Shame about Daniel and his wife," he said, not sounding sorry at all. But that's what happens when you forget where you come from. Saturday brought unexpected visitors. Emma and Tyler, dropped at my door by their other grandmother's driver. Margaret Hartman didn't come in, just waved from the car with a tight smile that said she was done with the complications of the Whitford family. "Grandma Helen," Emma said, her 11-year-old face serious. "Are you really selling Mom's building?" "My building," I corrected gently. "And yes, I am." Tyler, 2 years younger, piped up. "Mom says you're being mean. Dad says you're being difficult. Grandma Hartman says you're being—" Emma elbowed him quiet. I made them hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, the kind Caroline limited for health reasons. We sat at my small kitchen table, and I told them stories about the building, how I'd saved for it, restored it, the tenants who'd become like family over the years. I showed them pictures from the 80s, when downtown was shabby but full of hope. "So you owned it the whole time?" Emma asked, understanding dawning in her eyes. "The whole time." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Mom should have been nicer about the scarf." From the mouths of babes. When Margaret's driver returned, the children hugged me with genuine affection, something that had been trained out of them at Caroline's formal gatherings. As they left, Tyler turned back. "Grandma Helen, next year, can we have Thanksgiving at your house? With normal food?" I smiled. "We'll see." The building would sell. The practice would relocate or dissolve. The image Caroline had built in my foundation would crumble. But my grandchildren would remember that sometimes standing up for yourself looks like a for sale sign, and that respect can't be bought with cruise tickets or manipulated with false charm. The scarf still lay on my table, a polyester reminder that knowing your worth isn't about what others give you. It's about refusing to accept less than you deserve. The final confrontation came on a bitter Tuesday evening. 2 weeks after the sign went up, Caroline arrived alone at 7:45 p.m., her usual polish stripped away. Her designer coat hung awkwardly. Her perfectly styled hair showed roots, and her face bore the rawness of someone who'd lost control of their carefully managed life. She didn't wait for an invitation, pushing past me into my living room with a desperation that would have embarrassed her former self. "You win!" she spat, throwing her purse on my worn sofa. "Is that what you want to hear? You've destroyed us. We've lost 70% of our clients. The bank won't extend our line of credit without the building as collateral. Daniel's partners are threatening to leave the firm because of the reputational damage. Are you satisfied?" I settled into my armchair, the one I'd bought second-hand when Daniel was 10. "Would you like some tea?" "Tea?" Her laugh bordered on hysterical. "You're offering me tea while my children's future crumbles? While everything we've built, everything you built on my foundation," I interrupted calmly, without asking, without acknowledgement, without gratitude. Her mask finally shattered completely. The polished therapist, the society darling, the careful curator of images, all of it fell away, revealing something ugly and desperate underneath. "You stupid old woman," she hissed. "You think this is about gratitude? You think a few thank you cards would have changed anything? You were an embarrassment every time you showed up with your bus pass and your clearance rack clothes. You reminded everyone where Daniel came from. We were trying to rise above that, to give our children better. Better than what? Better than a grandmother who worked honest jobs? Better than knowing their father was raised by someone who sacrificed everything for his future? Yes, the word exploded from her. Better than factory workers and food stamps and hand-me-down clothes. Better than your kind of life." There it was. The truth she'd dressed up in therapy speak and social niceties for years. I wasn't just forgotten. I was actively erased because my existence threatened the fictional origin story she'd created. "My kind of life," I repeated softly. "Bought the building that made your kind of life possible." She paced my small living room like a caged animal. "I'll tell everyone the truth, how you're a vindictive old woman who's destroying her own grandchildren's future out of spite. I'll make sure this whole town knows." "Knows what? That you built a practice on property you don't own. That you took advantage of a mother's love and gave nothing back. That you valued me at exactly $14.99 while spending $20,000 on your parents." I reached for the scarf, holding it up. "Go ahead, Caroline. Tell them. See whose side they take." She lunged forward, snatching the scarf from my hands. This? This is what you're destroying us over? A piece of polyester? No, I'm selling my building, as is my right. You're destroying yourselves over your inability to see people as more than props in your performance." Daniel arrived then, barely knocked before entering. He looked between his wife and me, taking in Caroline's wild eyes and my calm demeanor. "Caroline, what are you— Your mother is insane," she snarled. "She's destroying our lives over a scarf, a $15 scarf. $14.99, I corrected. "On clearance." Daniel's face crumbled. He looked older than his 42 years, worn down by the weight of choosing sides. "Mom, please, I'm begging you. We'll make it right. We'll—" "What? Start paying rent now. Include me in family photos? Pretend the last 5 years didn't happen?" I stood, my knees protesting. "It's too late for that, Daniel. You made your choice every time you let her treat me like an inconvenience. Every time you prioritized their comfort over my dignity. Every time you forgot who held you when you cried, who worked doubles to buy your football cleats, who believed in you when no one else did. I never forgot. No? Then tell me, son. Tell me one sacrifice I made for you. One night I stayed up with you when you were sick. One job I took to pay for your education. Tell me one thing about my life that mattered to yours." The silence stretched between us. Caroline clutched the scarf. Daniel stared at the floor, and I waited. But the memories had been edited out, overwritten by Caroline's careful revisionism. That's what I thought. I moved toward the door, a clear dismissal. "Mister, Morrison has several strong offers. I'll be accepting the highest one by week's end. You have 30 days to vacate after closing." Caroline's final words came out raw and threatening. "You'll regret this. When you're alone, when the grandchildren don't know you, when Daniel stops calling, you'll regret this. We'll make sure you're nothing to them. Nothing." I met her gaze steadily. "I've been nothing to you for years. At least now I'll be nothing with $1.2 million and my self-respect intact." They left in a hurricane of slammed doors and squealing tires. I picked up the scarf from where Caroline had dropped it, smoothing out the wrinkles. Tomorrow. I'd meet with Morrison to review the offers. Thursday. I'd sign the papers. By New Year's, the building would belong to someone who'd pay fair market value for it. I sat in my chair as the evening deepened into night, thinking about Tyler's request for Thanksgiving at my house. Maybe next year. Maybe Emma would remember the stories I'd told her about the building. Maybe someday Daniel would understand. Or maybe not. But I'd learned something valuable from that clearance scarf. When people show you what you're worth to them, believe them, and then decide what you're worth to yourself, the building would sell. Their practice would relocate or close. The image would shatter, and I would finally own something more valuable than property, the knowledge that I'd refused to accept less than my value, even from those who should have valued me most. The papers were signed on a Thursday morning at 10 a.m. Morrison's office smelled of old leather and coffee, a comforting combination that steadied my hands as I wrote my name across the documents. $1.3 million, $100,000 over asking, the buyers. A young couple who wanted to open a physical therapy practice had fallen in love with the building's bones, its history, its potential. They reminded me of myself 40 years ago, full of dreams and determination. "It's official," Morrison said, sliding the check across his desk. "The building changes hands in 30 days. I didn't drive past Market Street that day, or the next. But news of the completed sale spread faster than winter frost. Nancy from the bakery called to tell me Caroline had been seen loading boxes into a rental truck at 2 a.m., trying to avoid the daytime crowds. The receptionist had already found another job. The carefully curated furniture was being sold piece by piece on Facebook Marketplace. I recognized the meditation room chairs going for a fraction of their original price. Daniel came by one last time. On a Sunday afternoon when the December light was already fading at 4 p.m., he stood at my door like a stranger, holding a banker's box. "Your things from the building," he said. "Some old photos, documents you might want." I took the box, noting how he avoided my eyes. Inside were pictures I'd forgotten. Daniel as a baby in front of the building, the day I'd gotten the keys, various tenants over the years who'd become like family. At the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, was the brass nameplate from my old office on the 3rd floor. H. Whitford, owner. "Caroline's filed for separation," he said quietly. "She blames me for not managing you better, says I should have seen this coming, should have protected our interests." I said nothing. What was there to say? He'd made his bed with Egyptian cotton sheets and a view of the country club. Now he'd have to lie in it. "The kids ask about you," he continued. "Emma especially. She wants to know if you'll still make hot chocolate with extra marshmallows. Emma knows where I live." He nodded, understanding the terms. Any relationship would be on my schedule now, my choice. The power dynamic had shifted with the signing of those papers. After he left, I sat at my kitchen table with the box of memories. So many years, so many people who'd passed through that building. But buildings, like relationships, only shelter you if you maintain them properly. Caroline had decorated the surface while ignoring the foundation. Daniel had assumed inheritance while forgetting gratitude. The scarf still lay on my side table, but it no longer hurt to look at it. It had served its purpose, a polyester catalyst that revealed the truth about value and family and the price of being forgotten. 3 weeks later, I met the new owners at the building for a final walkthrough. They were eager, respectful, full of questions about the building's history. I gave them the grand tour, not Caroline's version that began with her discovery, but the real story, the leaking roof I'd patched, the floors I'd refinished, the windows I'd restored one at a time as I could afford them. "You really did all this yourself?" the young woman asked, running her hand along the banister I'd stripped one summer while Daniel played at my feet. Most of it, when you don't have money, you learn to have skills. They promised to honor the building's history, to keep its character while making their own mark. I believed them. They had the same hunger in their eyes that I'd had, the determination that comes from having everything to prove and nothing to lose. On New Year's Eve, I deposited the check, $1.3 million, not enough to buy back the years of being erased, but enough to ensure I'd never be dependent on anyone's charity or pity again. Enough to take taxis instead of buses, enough to buy scarves that weren't on clearance, though I probably still would. Old habits being what they are, I kept the $15 scarf, not as a reminder of humiliation, but as proof of transformation. Sometimes the smallest insults reveal the biggest truths. Sometimes a clearance rack item can be worth more than a Mediterranean cruise. If it shows you exactly where you stand and gives you the courage to stand somewhere else. The building on Market Street thrives under its new owners. I pass by sometimes, watching young professionals climb those same steps, full of hope and ambition. Daniel calls occasionally, his voice careful and measured. Emma visits on Saturdays, learning to bake in my small kitchen. Tyler joins her sometimes, both of them freed from Caroline's rigid control now that she's too busy salvaging her image to manage theirs. And me? I sit in my modest apartment, a millionaire in sensible shoes. Proof that sometimes the best revenge isn't just living well, it's refusing to live as less than you're worth. The scarf hangs on a hook by my door now, a polyester flag of independence. They thought I would disappear into the background, grateful for whatever crumbs they offered. Instead, I sold the table they'd been feasting at. Let them find somewhere else to eat. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please leave a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about Helen's decision. What would you have done in her situation? Your comments mean the world to me, and I read every single one. Until next time, remember, know your worth and never accept less.